Hey everyone, it's Killian. Today we're talking about Hamilton the Revolution and Hamilton the musical soundtrack. This was a really interesting assignment, seeing how this is kind of a live production that we aren't able to see, which I'm so upset about. That's one thing that upset me about this assignment, is that I just wish I could see Hamilton now. Like, I'm kind of obsessed. Which is something that I'm going to get into a little bit, is the obsession around Hamilton. That's kind of the first thing that I wanted to address in my review. So, I've been hearing about Hamilton for quite a while now. I mean, pretty much since it came out. But it's astounded me how many different parts of media it's been able to infiltrate. Like, for example, I was watching a YouTube video with this girl called The Gabby Show. She was from Vine, and just randomly in one of her videos, the video had nothing to do with Hamilton, she started singing a song from Hamilton, and I was like, that is so interesting that this song, this play or musical about the life of Alexander Hamilton has become so popularized that YouTube stars with millions of subscribers are just randomly, casually singing it because it's a catchy tune, yet it's literally telling the history of Alexander Hamilton. It's kind of like trippy. It kind of freaks me out that this has become so popular. I think it's really awesome. So that is something that I first want to address, is it possible that this could be a new way of teaching? The way that Hamilton essentially tells the story of Alexander Hamilton from his his childhood up until, his death and the aftermath. Personally, I knew nothing about Alexander Hamilton except for the fact, that he was, like, one of the founding fathers, kind of like he was involved in, the American Revolution, everything with George Washington. I didn't really know his whole story until reading Hamilton the Revolution, listening to the soundtrack, and kind of looking into everything more. So, something that astounded me that Miranda, the creator of this, did, is that he involved so many pieces of current media from 50 years ago, and then this story, which is roughly, I think, 200 years old, somewhere around there, 100 to 200 years old. Put modern kind of sounding music, and like you can see in the books and some of the footnotes, he says that he used beats and such, or like phrasing from Biggie Smalls, or like Notorious B.I.G. and things like that. So these, very current forms of music, and changing the races of actors. Race wasn't taken into account in this at all, which I think is really amazing. It's like, there was a time before the concept of race existed, which is something that Debbie Roberts talks about in her history classes, and that's what this kind of reminded me of. Race wasn't taken into thought when they were casting these roles. Does this person fit the embodiment or the soul of this character? Race wasn't taken into account, and I think that's a very modern, way of looking and way of thinking, in a way that wouldn't have been popular during Alexander Hamilton's time, so it's kind of a contrast, because definitely, Latin people or African American people wouldn't have been allowed to be Alexander Hamilton or the Schuyler sisters. It's just very modern, but set in this old period of time. So the point I'm trying to get to with all of this is that, could this be a way of teaching different concepts to young people? The video that Kirsten posted of her, singing that first song from Alexander Hamilton, that first Alexander Hamilton, that one that is like the most popular song, singing it to, I'm assuming that was one of her classes at Tri-City Prep, and they were loving it. They were singing along with her, but they're singing about Alexander Hamilton. It's amazing. This could be a way to teach concepts to students, like especially difficult concepts like that are kind of like deep and serious, to add this whole musical and acting and just make it modern and lively. That could be an amazing way to teach students that are kind of resistant, and a great way to remember. What a great way to memorize just even small facts from those songs. I was really, really impressed by the whole production quality of both the soundtrack and this book. The book and the footnotes were so helpful and really just taught me more about Alexander Hamilton Lin-Manuel Miranda and just everyone in the whole play, in the whole musical, because they were so in depth. I really liked his process of creating and how he talked about how the journey kind of started for him at the White House. I was at the White House just a few weeks ago, so that kind of really stuck with me. DC has this certain spirit to it. It's almost like you can like feel the history around you. So I can see how he was kind of empowered by that to make this intimate performance of this song that he really like never practiced before, kind of like didn't really do in private even, and then to captivate the president, captivate the first lady, captivate the whole audience in front of him. That must have just been an amazing feeling, and reading about it was really, really captivating. I'm just looking in my book here to find some of my many sticky notes so I can reference some of the parts that I really enjoyed. So one thing I thought was interesting is we talk about showing rather than telling a lot, obviously, in our fiction writing. And in that first song, Alexander Hamilton, there's a part where James Madison, the character James Madison, is saying, put a pencil to his temple, connected it to his brain, and he wrote his first refrain, a testament to his pain. So he's saying, Alexander Hamilton was thinking. He was thinking about what happened to him. He was thinking about his life. But he doesn't say Alexander Hamilton was thinking. He says he put a pencil to his temple, connected it to his brain. So I love that. That's a way of, showing in a kind of metaphorical or literal way rather than telling, oh, he was thinking about what happened to him or he was pondering his life. I really enjoyed that. So I found little things in here that I could actually apply in my own writing, even though this is kind of like lyrical rap, like put into text with footnotes. Like somehow I was still able to like find things I can apply, which I think is amazing. And okay, so in my shot, there's a part where they spell out like Alexander Hamilton's name, and in the footnotes, that's the part where it says, so this canvas was used by the Notorious B.I.G. and going back to Cali. So here we have a song that is probably from, I think it was like either the 80s or the 90s. I'm not exactly, I think it was probably the 80s, but when that song came out. So here we have a musical from the 2010s decade referencing a song from the 1980s or 90s. And then, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it right here, but there's another section where he actually references South Pacific, the musical South Pacific, which I think was from either I think it's from the 60s. But so here he's referencing a rap, he's referencing a musical from the 60s, all in this musical about Alexander Hamilton from 2000, I think it's 2016 or the 2010s decade. I just was so impressed about how he was able to integrate so much of American culture into this piece. It's like a synthesized piece of American culture. So that was just really, really impressive to me. Something I also enjoyed was the song Hurricane. That was one of my favorite songs. It's near the end. It's in the last act. This is really where we see our protagonist, Alexander Hamilton, struggling really, really hard. And this is right before he makes arguably, what they say is like one of like his worst decisions, publishing that pamphlet. So it's a hard song to listen to, but it's a beautiful song because what he kind of keeps repeating is, I couldn't seem to die. He was in all these situations where he really should have died or should have come out worse than he did, and he didn't. And it's kind of something that sticks with him and kind of haunts him all throughout his life. And I especially like the colors that they used on this page to kind of, it really fits the mood of that song. And I've listened to it quite a few times, and it's really haunting and just. There's another part where here he's talking about Alexander Hamilton never used words more devastating than he used them against himself. And I can really relate to that as a writer and someone who's kind of, like hyper self-critical. I'm never more hard with what I say or what I think than I am on myself. And I can kind of see like a piece of me inside of how they portrayed Alexander Hamilton here. So that was kind of, I enjoyed it, but it also was a little bit haunting, especially in that hurricane part where it's like, it's easy to get consumed in your past or the mistakes you've made when maybe you really should just rise above them or, persevere. And okay, one of the questions that I really enjoyed from Professor Kaufman was the connection between Hamilton and Shakespeare. I loved this so much. And then, like, when she mentioned that, it just clicked in my head. And I didn't first realize it, but they're so similar. One thing I realized, I took Intro to Shakespeare last semester with Dr. Fisher, and we read Henry V, which is one of Shakespeare's history plays. So it's like historical fiction kind of. It's based off of all the real events, but he kind of spiffs it up. He dramatizes it a little bit. Kind of like what we see in Hamilton. Obviously, we don't know all of this word for what happened, so we give a little bit of room here and there. And it was similar with Henry V. So he wrote it in roughly the late 1500s or the early 1600s. And it was regarding a story that happened, in the 1400s. So it was like roughly 200 years before he wrote it. And it's this story of British culture, British perseverance, British overcoming and overthrowing. It's a really patriotic story for the British. The whole King Henry V and the Battle of Agincourt and all of that kind of stuff. And that's so similar to what we see here. And I mean, Shakespeare was like the popular media back then. So whatever he wrote was kind of like what was popular. And here we see a story from roughly 200, 300 years ago about American culture, about Americans persevering, Americans overcoming, about how our country came to be, written by someone who makes popular media. I mean, like Moana, because Lin-Manuel Miranda did that too. He's done things that have become very popular within our culture. And he's taking this story, this story from our history, so a historic story, and turning it into a piece of popular media, a piece of a musical. So they're very similar, making this historic thing from around 200, 300 years ago, taking it and turning it into popular media. We're just about 500 years apart from each other. So I really saw the similarities there, and I was really intrigued because they're important stories, both the story of King Henry V and the story of Alexander Hamilton. They're very important to their specific countries and cultures. So I really like that similarity, and I think that Lin-Manuel Miranda could have a similar amount of fame in culture as Shakespeare has. So that's pretty much all I have for Alexander Hamilton, the Revolution. I really, really, really enjoyed it. I wish we had more time to talk about it, honestly, but I don't want to go over the time limit. I liked that the music was very different and unique. Every song was so different. I saw pieces of what I could connect to my writing in here, like showing and not telling. And then also there was a section I'll mention really quick where Angelica has a flashback to how they portrayed Eliza in like The Helpless and The Winter Ball. She goes back and kind of says it from her point of view. And that just really, that satisfaction, where we see that part through Angelica's eyes after we had seen it through Eliza's, and it's so different. I would love to do that in my own writing, to show a scene and then go back and do the scene through someone else's perspective to see how much it changes, see how different it is. I think that could be really, really useful, but like he stated in there, it was hard to pull off. It's hard to pull off when you go over something and then you go back and go over it again. So it would have to be really carefully done, but things like that I pick up and I think I want to use in my own writing. So thank you so much. I loved Hamilton. I'm sad that this class is almost over, but thank you so much for all of the awesome assignments, and I can't wait to see what you guys thought of the soundtrack and Hamilton the Revolution. So thanks so much, guys.